At exactly 9 o'clock on a Tuesday morning, in a glass-walled boardroom on the 23rd floor of a midtown Manhattan tower, a 38-year-old black single father stood up, looked the youngest billionaire CEO in American media in the eyes, and said out loud every truth that everyone else had swallowed for 3 years. Olivia Hart rose from her chair, crossed the conference table, grabbed his face with both hands, and kissed him hard on the mouth in front of 20 witnesses. Then she walked out, without a single word. Nobody moved. Marcus Cole stood there wondering if he had just ended his career or changed his entire life. The alarm went off at 5:47, same as every morning. Marcus Cole was already half awake before the sound started, lying in the dark of his Harlem apartment running the list in his head. Electric bill paid, Zoe's lunch packed, presentation printed. 2 years of raising his daughter alone had made the checklist automatic, the way grief eventually reorganizes itself into something you can function inside of. He padded down the narrow hallway and stopped outside his daughter's door. Zoe was 7 years old and slept with it cracked open, enough to let the hall light fall across her bed without waking her. He stood there watching the small shape of her under the blanket, the one with the cartoon elephants she had chosen herself 2 Christmases ago. He stood there long enough to feel his shoulders drop. This was the part of the day he could handle. Before the world started asking things of him, by 6:30, he had coffee going and eggs scrambled. Zoe stumbled out in her pajamas, hair in 4 different directions, climbing onto the kitchen chair with the gravity of someone conducting important business. "Is today the big meeting?" she asked. "It is," Marcus said. "With the scary lady?" "She's not scary. She's just demanding." Zoe looked up at him the way she did when she thought he was wrong. That's what grown-ups say when someone is mean to them. Marcus didn't have an answer for that, which probably meant she was right. Olivia Hart had taken over Hart and Levine Media 3 years ago, when her father died suddenly of a heart attack at 61. She was 30 years old and had inherited a company bleeding money, losing staff, and 2 quarters from a sale that would have erased 60 years of her family's name from the industry. She stopped the bleeding in 90 days. She rebuilt the revenue model in 1 year. By the 2nd year, she had transformed a struggling legacy publisher into a multimedia empire, spanning print, digital, and streaming. Nobody had seen a turnaround move that fast, and nobody fully understood how she had made it happen. What they understood was the cost. Olivia Hart did not ask for your best effort. She assumed it, and then asked why it wasn't better. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. She would look at your work with those pale green eyes and dismantle it methodically, without sentiment, until there was nothing left but the parts that didn't function. People feared her because she was almost always right, and being right while being cold leaves permanent marks. Marcus had worked at Hart and Levine for 4 years, surviving the transition from the old regime to the new one. Under Richard Hart, things moved carefully, and with room for error. Under Olivia, there was no room. There was only the standard, and the standard was whatever she decided it was on any given morning. 3 months ago, his team had been handed the winter campaign launch for the company's new streaming platform. He had worked 18-hour days, skipped weekends, eaten dinner at his desk more nights than he could count. Jenny, Samir, and Deshawn had done the same. The work was good. Marcus knew in his bones the work was good. He just wasn't certain that was going to be enough for Olivia Hart. Marcus arrived at 8:15, set up the presentation, and stood with his team trying to look steadier than he felt. That Tuesday, the sky was gray and heavy, threatening the first real snow of the season. Olivia arrived at exactly 9 o'clock. She didn't make entrances. She simply appeared, and the room reorganized itself around her. She sat at the head of the table, opened her laptop, and looked up. "Marcus, whenever you're ready." The first 10 minutes went well. He walked through the strategy, a multi-platform rollout across streaming, social, print, and outdoor hitting simultaneously. The creative was sharp. The targeting was precise. Heads nodded. Olivia's expression stayed focused and unreadable. Then he reached the timeline. "We're looking at a 6-week execution window," Marcus said, "starting December 1st, with the major push in the 2 weeks leading into Christmas." "Stop." Olivia's voice cut across the room. She looked up from her screen. 6 weeks. For a campaign of this scale, we've stress-tested it. It's tight, but achievable. Achievable. She repeated the word like something found on the bottom of a shoe. That's the best word you have for it? The room went quiet. In the specific way it went quiet. When Olivia was about to take something apart, Marcus held his ground. He walked through the contingencies, the backup vendors, the phased structure built to absorb delay. Olivia listened without expression, and then said he had built a plan that required nothing to go wrong, and in her experience, something always went wrong. With respect, Marcus said. And he heard his own voice sharpen. We've accounted for every delay scenario at every stage. You've accounted for hope, she said. Hope is not a strategy. Then what would you suggest? The room froze. The leadership team went very still. The way people go still when something is about to break open. Olivia walked slowly back toward the table. Rebuild the timeline to live in reality. 8 weeks minimum. 10 would be better. 10 weeks puts us in mid-January. We lose the entire holiday window. The concept is built around Christmas. Then build a different concept. Something cracked open in Marcus's chest. 3 months of 18-hour days. Of missing bedtime with Zoe. Of takeout at his desk and weekend sessions that never ended. 3 months of his team giving everything they had. No, he said. The word landed in the silence. Like a stone dropped in still water. Olivia tilted her head. I'm sorry, I said no. Marcus's heart was hammering, but his voice came out level. This campaign is exceptional. The timeline is aggressive, but achievable. And I can prove that with the data. You haven't let me finish presenting. He paused. And then, because he was exhausted, and because it was true, and because this moment had been building for 3 years, he kept going. I don't understand how you expect people to do their best work when you won't trust them. You want to know why we can't hold talent? Why people are breaking down? It's not the work. It's because nothing we give is ever enough for you. Jenny's hand landed on his arm. He didn't stop. I've missed 17 bedtimes in 3 months because of this campaign. Jenny's marriage is falling apart. Samir's on blood pressure medication at 34. Deshaun hasn't seen his kids awake in 2 weeks. He gestured at the screen. This campaign is great, but you cannot see it because you are so focused on finding what's wrong that you've stopped seeing what is actually in front of you. The boardroom was completely silent. Olivia stood very still. Her face gave nothing. And then she moved. She crossed the room in 4 strides, reached up, grabbed Marcus's face with both hands, and kissed him. 3 seconds. Long enough for the room to exhale and shock, long enough for his brain to go blank. Then she released him, turned, and walked out. The door clicked shut. Jenny whispered, "What just happened?" Nobody had an answer. The next 4 hours dissolved into noise. Claire, Olivia's assistant, walked Marcus back to his office without a word, though her expression communicated clearly enough. His phone started buzzing immediately. Texts from colleagues asking variations of the same question. He answered none of them. At 11:30, he received an email from HR requesting his presence at 2 o'clock for a conversation regarding the morning's leadership meeting. At 1:15, a different notification appeared. A reminder from Zoe's school. He had forgotten completely. It was his day to pick her up early for her dentist appointment. He grabbed his coat and left without writing back to any of them. The HR meeting could wait. Zoe could not. The subway took 35 minutes and Marcus spent every second of it replaying the morning, Olivia's hands on his face. The 3-second silence that had followed, the way the entire room had stopped breathing. He had worked at Hart & Levine for 4 years. He had watched people dissolve under Olivia Hart's scrutiny, watched careers stall, watched talented people quietly begin updating their resumes. He had been one of the careful ones. He had chosen his words. He had measured his pushback. He had gone home to Zoe and been the steady version of himself that she needed him to be. And then that morning, in front of the entire leadership team, he had said every word he had been swallowing for 2 years straight. He still didn't fully understand what had made him stop holding back. He wasn't certain that understanding it would make any of what came next easier. Zoe came running out at 3:15, backpack bouncing, face bright. How was the big meeting? she asked before she'd reached him. Complicated. She studied him the way she always did when she thought he was leaving something important out. Did the scary lady like the presentation? I don't know yet. They stopped at the coffee shop on the way to the dentist, the small one on 116th Street with a green awning. Zoe ordered hot chocolate with extra whipped cream. Marcus sat across from her and tried to organize what he was feeling into something with an actual shape. Dad, Zoe said without looking up from her cup, you look different than regular work sad. Like something actually happened today. Something did. Was it bad? I genuinely don't know yet. Zoe considered this with the seriousness she brought to things that mattered. Mom used to say that people who are mean to other people are usually mean to themselves first. Is the scary lady mean to herself? Marcus looked at his daughter, 7 years old, asking the one question that none of the adults in that boardroom had thought to ask. I think she might be, he said. Then she's probably just lonely, Zoe said, and went back to her hot chocolate like the matter was completely resolved. She had that particular certainty that 7-year-olds carry before the world teaches them to second-guess themselves. The dentist appointment went fine. No cavities. They got pizza on the walk home, and Zoe talked about volcanoes for 40 consecutive minutes. Marcus listened and said the right things at the right moments, and underneath all of it, he kept turning over the word Zoe had used. Lonely. Was that the whole answer? Was it really that simple? That evening, his phone buzzed with a message from a number he didn't recognize. 7 words. Rooftop garden. 7 p.m. Come alone. He stared at the screen for a long moment. Then he called his neighbor Mrs. Patterson and asked if she could sit with Zoe for an hour. The Hart and Levine building was mostly empty when Marcus arrived at 7:10. Security nodded him through without question, which meant he had been cleared in advance. The elevator ride to the rooftop felt different from every other ride he had taken in this building. Heavier. Like ascending through a different kind of air. The rooftop garden was Olivia's addition to the building, commissioned when she took over. In summer, it was probably striking. In late November, it had the austere stillness of a space, built to impress rather than comfort. Snow had begun to fall, light flakes dissolving before they reached the heated floor tiles below. Olivia stood at the far edge with her back to him, looking out at the city. She had changed out of her suit. Jeans, a dark sweater. Without the boardroom armor, she looked smaller, and something in her posture was different from every version of her he had ever seen. Less defended, less certain of where to hold the weight. You came, she said without turning. You texted. She turned to face him. In the ambient glow from the city below, her expression was unlike anything he had ever seen from her. Not controlled, not calculating. Something raw underneath all of it. I owe you an apology, she said. What I did this morning was inappropriate, unprofessional, and completely unacceptable. I'm going to recommend to HR that an external review be conducted, and I'll be recusing myself from direct oversight of your division. Effective immediately. Okay, Marcus said. But before any of that, I need you to understand something. She looked at the city for a long moment. In my entire professional life, no one has ever spoken to me the way you did this morning. Not my board, not my father. Nobody. People are afraid of me. Or they leave. You looked me in the face and told me the truth about what I was doing to people. I was out of line. You were honest. Do you know how rare that is? She turned back to him. I didn't know what to do with it. So I did the most irrational thing I've done in 10 years of running this company. And I need you to know, it was panic. Not calculation, not strategy. Just a person who didn't know what to do with honesty and made the worst possible choice. She paused. Your daughter was right. About me being lonely. Whatever you told her about why you pushed back, whatever she heard, she had the whole thing right. Olivia looked at him and said nothing for a long moment. Then quietly, she was right. The snow was falling harder. Marcus noticed she was shivering. He shrugged off his jacket and held it out. She started to refuse. The automatic reflex of someone who had learned that needing things from people was a vulnerability she couldn't afford to show. Olivia, Marcus said. It was the first time he had used her name to her face. Take the jacket. She looked at him for a moment. Then she took it, pulling it on over the sweater without another word. They stood there for a while in the falling snow, looking at the city below. Marcus thought about the distance between the woman standing beside him now and the one who had sat at the head of that table this morning, dismantling his work with the calm precision of someone who had never considered that there might be a human cost to being right. The distance was large. He wasn't sure what had crossed it. Before he left, she told him the campaign was approved. 8-week window, increased budget, full executive support from the leadership team. She said it without ceremony or qualification. The way you say something you should have said hours earlier, and finally know it. The concept is brilliant, she said. I should have told you that this morning instead of making you fight for every word of it. Marcus nodded. Then he walked to the elevator and rode down into the city that never stopped moving below. 2 days later, Olivia texted. She wanted to meet Zoe. Just coffee near the school. Nothing formal. Marcus replied that his daughter was the toughest audience he had ever faced, and she should prepare accordingly. Olivia replied that she had negotiated with hedge fund managers and hostile boards for a decade, and she could handle a 7-year-old. She could not. Zoe sat across from Olivia at the small cafe on 118th Street with the particular seriousness of a child who has decided this moment requires her complete attention. She had a hot chocolate in front of her and had not touched it yet because she was still conducting her assessment. Have you been practicing? Zoe asked. Olivia blinked. Practicing what? Being nice. Dad said you're not very good at it. I said she was intense, Marcus said. That's a different thing. You said intense. Same thing. Zoe looked back at Olivia. So have you been practicing? Olivia did not deflect. I have, actually. This morning I let someone merge in front of me in traffic without honking. I told the woman at the front desk her earrings were beautiful, which they genuinely were, and I approved a budget request for the design team without marking it up with a single correction. Zoe considered this carefully. Did you mean the earrings? Or were you just saying it? They were little gold hoops with tiny stars. I meant every word of it. Zoe nodded slowly. Okay, that counts. She picked up her hot chocolate. Why don't you have kids, Zoe? Marcus said. It's a real question, Dad. Olivia folded her hands on the table the way someone does when they have decided to answer honestly, instead of carefully. Because I kept putting it off for work, and then for more work. And then one day I looked up and realized I had built an entire life with no room left in it for anyone else. You could make room, Zoe said. It's more complicated than that. Why? People make room for things that matter. Dad made room for me after Mom died. He didn't have space, but then he did, because I mattered more than the space did. Olivia looked at Zoe for a long moment. Something shifted behind her eyes visibly. Some arrangement of things settling into a new position that hadn't been available to her before this 7-year-old sat down across from her. When they left the cafe, the three of them walked out into the cold afternoon together. A woman on the sidewalk, white, somewhere in her 40s, slowed as she passed. Her eyes moved from Marcus to Olivia to Zoe with an expression that took its time deciding what it thought it was looking at. Marcus noticed. He always noticed. He had been reading looks like that his entire life. The fractional hesitation, the quiet recalculation, the polite version of a question that was never really about curiosity. Zoe tugged his hand. Why is that lady staring at us? She's trying to understand something she hasn't seen before, Marcus said. What hasn't she seen? Us, he said simply. Zoe thought about that for half a block. Then she said, that's her problem, and kept walking without slowing down. Olivia said nothing, but Marcus caught her watching the woman until she turned the corner, and he saw something in Olivia's face that he hadn't seen before today. Not the controlled expression of a CEO managing a situation. Something more personal than that, something slower. The beginning of a reckoning with a part of the world she had been insulated from for so long, she had stopped fully accounting for it. He didn't say anything, he just walked beside her and let her think. When they reached the subway entrance, he held the door. She walked through without looking back at where the woman had been. But her jaw was set in a way that told Marcus she hadn't stopped thinking about it. The following week, the external consultants arrived. They set up in the conference rooms on the 21st floor and began interviewing employees in 30-minute blocks. The company moved around them the way water moves around a stone, aware of them, adjusting, watching what the current would do. On Thursday morning, Claire called Marcus's office with news that rearranged the air in the room. There was an anonymous email. A senior executive, identity unknown, had submitted a formal complaint to the board. The complaint did not reference the HR situation or the boardroom incident. Instead, it raised a different concern, expressed in language that was careful and corporate and unmistakable in what it was actually communicating. It suggested that recent decisions regarding the winter campaign approval and budget allocation reflected bias on the part of the CEO, bias attributable to her personal relationship with a black employee whose work would not have received equivalent treatment under objective evaluation. Marcus read the forwarded summary twice. Then he called Olivia. "I'm pulling my name from the project," he said. "I'll submit a formal transfer request today. It removes the target from your back." "Don't," she said immediately, flat and certain. "Do not do that. It solves the immediate problem." "It doesn't solve anything. It rewards whoever wrote that email by proving them right. They are not right." A brief pause. "Marcus, I need you to stand where you are. I need you to trust me on this. Can you do that?" He didn't answer right away. Trust was not something Marcus gave without cost, not to people who held the kind of institutional power over his life that Olivia Hart held. But he thought about the rooftop, about the jacket, about the way she had looked at his daughter across that cafe table, like every single word Zoe said deserved the full weight of her attention. "Yeah," he said, "I can do that." He hung up and sat at his desk for a long time after. He thought about what it cost him to say that. Trust had been expensive for Marcus ever since his wife died, ever since he learned how suddenly the things you counted on could vanish. He had rebuilt a smaller life after, organized around what he could control. Giving that trust to Olivia Hart felt like handing something fragile to someone who had spent 3 years demonstrating that she broke things. But she had also showed up. Every time she had been given the chance, she had. What happened in the board meeting, Marcus didn't witness directly, but Claire told him the outline afterward, quietly in the hallway, with the satisfaction of someone who has waited a long time to see something go exactly the right way. Olivia had walked in with printed projections, pre-launch click-through on teaser content at 240% of industry average, social share rate in the top 8% of all campaigns the company had run in 10 years, revenue projection against ad spend, at a ratio that made 3 of the 7 board members lean forward in their chairs. She laid it all down and said the campaign had been approved because it was exceptional, and that if the board wished to revisit the decision, they were welcome to identify on the record which specific metrics they found unconvincing. Then she said, whoever had written the anonymous email had identified Marcus Cole's race as a relevant factor in a business evaluation, and that she was formally requesting an internal audit of hiring and promotion decisions across the company's last 5 years, because if bias existed here, she intended to locate every place it lived. Nobody on the board said another word about the email. That Wednesday evening, Olivia called Marcus's cell. Her voice carried the specific tightness of someone who has been holding too many things together for too long and is beginning to feel exactly where the seams are pulling. "Can we meet somewhere?" she asked. "Not the office." "You can come here," Marcus said. "Zoe is working on her science project. It involves a papier-mâché volcano and approximately 2 pounds of glitter." A pause. "I don't know anything about volcanoes. Neither do we. That's entirely the point." She arrived 40 minutes later with a bag from the art supply store on 125th Street, her work clothes still on, her hair coming loose from its usual arrangement, her expression working hard to look like it wasn't nervous. "I didn't know what to bring," she said at the door. "I got extra paint." "We already have paint," Zoe said, appearing at Marcus's elbow. "But you can never have too much. Come in. We're making a mess." For 2 hours, the 3 of them sat at the kitchen table and built a volcano. They debated whether lava was more orange or more red. Zoe cited a library book, which turned out to be mostly accurate, and Olivia conceded the point with a grace she never showed in any boardroom. Red paint got on her expensive blouse around 8 o'clock. She didn't glance at it. She was laughing at something Zoe had said about Mount Vesuvius. A genuine laugh with no strategy in it. Marcus watched her from across the table and thought, there she is. Whoever this person actually is, when she isn't performing certainty for a room that expects it. After Zoe went to bed, Olivia helped clean up the kitchen. They made tea and sat in the living room, with the windows dark and the sounds of Harlem rising through the walls. I don't know how to stop controlling things, she said quietly. It's the only way I've ever survived. My father built everything on handshakes and trust, and it nearly destroyed the company. When I took over, I swore I would never be that exposed. There's a difference between being strong and making everyone around you afraid of you, is there? From where I've been standing, the only way to last in this industry is to be harder than everyone else. And lonelier, Marcus said. She looked at him. And lonelier. She told him the rest of it then. Her mother had left when she was 12, walked out on a Tuesday like it was unremarkable, said she couldn't continue, and was gone. Her father had responded the only way he knew, by pouring everything into the company, by making the work the whole world, by becoming someone who was never truly present, even when he was sitting right there at the dinner table. Olivia had grown up watching that, and believed she understood what it meant. And then, without realizing it, she had done the same thing until someone stood up in her boardroom and said it directly to her face. You didn't recognize it because you were living inside it, Marcus said. No, she said quietly. I recognized it. I just convinced myself for a long time that it was strength. She left around 11. He walked her to the door and she paused there, her hand on the frame, looking back at him with more honesty in her face than she had shown anyone in 4 years of running that company. Your daughter is extraordinary, she said. I hope she always knows that. I tell her every single day. Then you're doing something right that most people never figure out. The science fair was on a Friday evening in the school gymnasium. Zoe's volcano, Table 17, was a spectacular creation involving 3 levels of papier-mâché, paint in 4 shades of red and orange, and a quantity of gold glitter that caught the overhead lights and scattered them in every direction. Zoe stood beside it with the composed certainty of someone who has done the work and is fully confident in the result. Marcus arrived with her at 6:45. By 7:15, the gym was full. He checked his phone. Nothing from Olivia. The board meeting that afternoon had been scheduled to run until 6, but could have run longer. Zoe kept watching the door. She was careful about it, the way children are careful when they are hoping for something they don't want to admit they're hoping for. Every time a parent walked in and it wasn't Olivia, she would look back at the volcano and adjust something that didn't need adjusting, and then look at the door again. At 7:40, the gym doors swung open, and Olivia walked in, still in her work suit, hair coming down on one side, slightly out of breath, as if she had been moving fast for the last several blocks. She scanned the room, found them immediately, and came directly over. I'm sorry, she said to Zoe. The meeting ran long. I left the moment it ended. You're here, Zoe said simply. That's what matters. Do you want to see it erupt? They ran the eruption again, right there in the middle of the gym. Zoe poured the vinegar in with the focused solemnity of a scientist confirming a result, and baking soda foam erupted over the rim, and Zoe threw both hands up, and Olivia laughed, completely unguarded, the kind of laugh that has absolutely no performance in it. Zoe placed second. She declared this was essentially first place, because first place doesn't count as a real victory if your volcano has no glitter. She maintained this position the entire walk home. Zoe walked between Marcus and Olivia, and somewhere around the middle of the second block she reached out and took both their hands without comment, as if this were simply the correct arrangement of things. Marcus looked across his daughter's head at Olivia. She was already looking at him. When they reached the building, a group of men stood near the entrance. One of them watched Marcus approach and said something low to the person beside him, and the words carried across the cold air just clearly enough to catch. Something about a security guard, something about what was he doing here with her. Olivia heard it. Marcus saw it register in her face. She stopped walking. She turned to face the men, and her voice was the same voice she used in boardrooms where people with far more institutional power had tried to dismiss what she was saying. This man is Marcus Cole. He is the campaign director responsible for the most successful product launch this company has produced in 8 years. He is the most talented person I have worked alongside in my professional career, and he is the only person who has ever been honest with me, when being honest cost him something real." She held their gaze long enough to be certain they understood. Then she turned and walked through the front door. Marcus held it open for her. Zoe whispered, "She's getting really good at being nice." "She's getting there," Marcus agreed. He looked back once at the men near the entrance. None of them said anything else. The text came late that night, after Zoe was asleep, and Marcus was sitting on the couch with the lights low and the city running its quiet rhythm outside the window. He hadn't been able to settle. He kept returning to the walk home from the science fair. The way Zoe had reached for both their hands at once without thinking. The way it had felt like something clicking into the position it was always meant to occupy. His phone lit up on the cushion beside him. "I'm falling for you. I know I'm not supposed to say that, but I've spent 10 years saying only the things I was supposed to say, and I am trying very hard to stop doing that." He looked at the message for a long time. He thought about the reasonable arguments he had made to himself over the past 6 weeks, about professional distance, about complicated circumstances. Then he thought about the jacket on the rooftop, about red paint on an expensive blouse, about the way she had stopped on that sidewalk and said his name like it was something the world needed to hear said correctly. Then, "I've been falling since the rooftop, maybe before that," she replied quickly. "This is a terrible idea, probably. I've had worse ones." A pause. Then, "I'm afraid I'll ruin it. I ruin things I care about. I don't know how to be careful with people. I never learned." He sat with that for a moment before he answered. "You ran to a science fair after a board meeting," he wrote. "You stood on a Harlem sidewalk and said my name to people who needed to hear it. You spent 2 hours arguing about volcano colors and got paint on a blouse that probably costs more than my rent. People who ruin things don't do any of that." A longer pause. He could picture her reading it twice, the way she read everything important twice. "The board formalized the co-CEO proposal today. Patricia Vance. She is good at the parts I'm not. They want me to step back from daily operations and focus on strategy. How do you feel about it?" "Like I'm jumping off a cliff hoping there is water at the bottom." "There is water," he wrote. "I know because I have already jumped. After my wife passed, after I became a single father in a 2-bedroom apartment in Harlem with no plan except to show up every day and not fail her, you land, and then you figure out what comes next from wherever you land." Her reply came after a moment. "I would jump easier knowing someone was there when I landed." Marcus set the phone down and looked at the ceiling. Outside, a car passed on the street below. A siren rose to the north and then faded. This city was always moving, always asking something of the people who lived inside it, always indifferent to whether you were ready for what it put in your path. He thought about Zoe asleep down the hall. He thought about the two of them building that life from whatever pieces were left after grief had finished with them. He had not done it gracefully. He had done it because there was no other option, and because she needed him to. That was what showing up actually meant. Not readiness, just the decision to do it anyway. He picked up the phone. He thought about Zoe asleep down the hall, about 2 years of getting things wrong and getting back up and trying again, about how the best things he had were the things he hadn't planned for. He wrote, "I'm not going anywhere." Christmas Eve arrived cold and clear. Marcus had attempted his grandmother's lasagna from memory in 2 hours of research. The apartment smelled of garlic and tomatoes, and something slightly burnt at the edges he was hoping no one would mention. Zoe had changed outfits twice and stationed herself at the window. Olivia arrived at 7, carrying a bakery box with 6 kinds of cookies, because she had not known which ones to bring. "We're keeping you," Zoe announced. "You live here now." "I'll need a drawer," Olivia said. "You can have 2. They assembled the lasagna with Zoe directing, then played board games. Olivia approached Candyland with the same intensity she brought to earnings reviews, which Zoe found delightful and exploited without mercy. When Zoe finally went to sleep, Marcus and Olivia sat on the couch with tea, and the apartment quiet around them, the small tree blinking in the corner. Snow had started outside. "I told the board no on the buyout," Olivia said. I'm staying. Patricia as co-CEO. Me as strategic lead. What changed it? After the science fair, I sat in my apartment and thought about how I felt in that gym. For the first time in longer than I can remember, I didn't want to be anywhere else. I wasn't thinking about projections or the board. I was just there. She looked at him. I don't want to stop feeling that way. Marcus took her hand. For most of my life, I believed family was something you were born into or you weren't, she said. I wasn't. So I built something else instead. But watching you and Zoe, I think maybe family is something you decide. You decide to show up. You decide to stay. You decide it matters more than everything else. You showed up tonight. You showed up at the science fair. You gave me a jacket on a cold rooftop. You kept it. She looked at him. Then, I love you. I know it's too soon, but I have spent my whole life not saying the true things, and I am done with that. Marcus felt something open in his chest, the slow release of something held too long. I love you too, he said. Have for a while. Yeah. Neither of them spoke again for a long time. Outside, snow fell on Harlem. Inside, the tree lights blinked, and two people who had spent years building walls around themselves sat in the quiet knowledge that they had already made the only decision that was going to matter. Somewhere past midnight, Olivia simply stayed. She settled on the couch as the conversation slowed and the city went quiet, and that was where she was when morning came. At 6 o'clock, Zoe's door banged open, and she ran into the living room and stopped. She looked at Olivia. She looked at her father in the doorway. She looked at Olivia again. Then she nodded once, with the gravity of someone ratifying something important. Okay, she said, but you have to stay for pancakes. I wouldn't miss them, Olivia said. Dad burns them every single time, Marcus confirmed. Then I will make the pancakes, Olivia said. I am a very precise cook. You burned the garlic bread last night, Zoe pointed out. I am precise. I did not say I was experienced. Zoe laughed, and it filled the apartment the way her laugh always did, bigger than the room that was supposed to contain it. They made pancakes together, all three of them, Zoe directing, Olivia following instructions with careful attention, Marcus watching them both and thinking about nothing in particular and everything at once. The pancakes burned on one side. Nobody mentioned it. Outside, snow was still falling on Harlem in clean white silence, and inside, a family that had chosen each other was arguing cheerfully about pancake technique, which was exactly what Zoe had always understood people who are lonely need most. Other people showing up, staying, simple, and exactly right.